Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. The moment the wail of police sirens sliced through the heavy air outside the Newman ranch, Jack Abbott knew the carefully constructed illusion he had lived behind for months had finally shattered. And as flashing red and blue lights splashed violently against the polished windows, memories of every lie, every whispered threat, every secret meeting with Matt came crashing down on him in a suffocating wave of dread, because this was the reckoning Victor Newman had promised, the endgame Victor had patiently orchestrated while Jack believed he was still one step ahead. And when the front doors burst open and uniformed officers flooded the living room with clipped commands and unyielding stares, the room seemed to shrink around Jack as though the walls themselves were closing in to witness his downfall. While Nikki's sharp gasp cut through the tension like glass shattering and Phyllis stood frozen, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that told Jack everything he needed to know. Victor had won. The handcuffs clicked coldly around Jack's wrists, each metallic snap echoing louder than a gunshot as Victor stepped forward from the shadows with infuriating calm, his expression carved from stone, and began to speak, his voice low but devastating, unveiling secret after secret with surgical precision, revealing how Jack and Matt had forged a covert alliance born not of loyalty but desperation, how they had manipulated hospital records, laundered money through shell companies buried beneath Abbott Enterprises' ledgers, and staged elaborate deceptions designed to weaken Newman Enterprises from the inside out. Victor's words landing like hammer blows as he exposed clandestine late-night meetings, burner phones, falsified emails, and a hidden offshore account that traced directly back to Matt's bloody ambitions. And as the officers listened grimly and Jack's face drained of color, Victor went further, pulling back the curtain on the darkest truth of all, that Jack had known about Matt's violent tendencies, had known about the plan that would ultimately leave innocent lives hanging in the balance, and yet had chosen silence because power was too intoxicating to surrender. Gasps rippled through the room as Victor revealed how Jack had helped Matt disappear after the stabbing, how he had arranged a private transport and paid off a frightened orderly, how every move had been calculated, rehearsed, and cruel, and Jack's attempts to protest dissolved into hoarse, fractured denials that convinced no one, not even himself, because Victor had receipts for everything. Documents, recordings, witness statements, all meticulously gathered while Jack grew complacent, believing Victor too distracted or weakened to strike back. And when Victor finally turned his gaze fully on Jack, there was no triumph in his eyes, only a cold, almost sorrowful certainty, as if this betrayal cut deeper because of their shared history. And he delivered the final blow by revealing Matt's ultimate objective. Not merely to hurt Victor, but to dismantle the Newman legacy piece by piece, using Jack as both shield and weapon, promising him control of Jabot in exchange for loyalty, a promise that was never meant to be kept. The room seemed to spin as this truth settled, as Nikki's voice trembled with disbelief and Phyllis's anger ignited into something fierce and unforgiving, while Kyle watched his father with a mixture of heartbreak and rage that stabbed Jack far deeper than the handcuffs ever could. And when Victor calmly informed the police that Matt was already in custody, having turned on Jack in a desperate bid to save himself, Jack's knees nearly buckled. The weight of betrayal now mirrored back at him in cruel symmetry, because the man he had trusted had sold him out without hesitation. The officers guided Jack toward the door as whispers followed in his wake, every step a march through the ruins of his reputation. And outside, under the harsh glare of flashing lights and curious onlookers, Jack finally looked back at Victor, searching for some hint of mercy, some remnant of the complicated respect that once existed between them. But Victor's silence spoke volumes, a final judgment delivered without words. And as the patrol car door slammed shut and Jack was driven away, Victor turned to the stunned crowd and made it clear this was not revenge but justice, a necessary cleansing of rot that had threatened to consume them all, vowing that no matter how long it took or how deeply the poison ran, he would always expose the truth. And in that chilling declaration, everyone understood that the arrest of Jack Abbott was not just the fall of a man, but the eruption of secrets that would forever change the balance of power in Genoa City, leaving scars that would not heal quickly and alliances that would never be the same. The night after Jack Abbott's arrest did not bring silence to Genoa City but ignited it, because secrets, once exposed, do not lie quietly. They multiply, they mutate, and they hunt their victims relentlessly. And as the storm clouds gathered over the city like a grim omen, Victor Newman stood alone in his study, staring out at the darkness with the weight of everything he had revealed pressing heavily on his shoulders, knowing full well that pulling Jack and Matt into the light had only opened the door to deeper consequences. And across town in a stark, fluorescent-lit interrogation room, Jack sat rigid in his chair, the echo of Victor's words replaying in his mind like a cruel refrain, every revelation stripping away another layer of denial until all that remained was raw fear and regret, because Matt's betrayal was now undeniable, confirmed by the detective who coldly laid out the evidence Matt had handed over. Audio recordings of Jack authorizing payments, messages confirming cover. UPS, even a chilling confession describing how Jack had known the plan would end in blood and had still gone forward. And with each word Jack's composure fractured further, his hands trembling as he realized that the empire he had spent a lifetime building was unraveling not because of Victor alone, but because of the choices he himself had made. Meanwhile, at the Newman ranch, Nikki struggled to steady herself as Phyllis paced like a caged animal, fury blazing as she demanded answers that Victor had already given but that her heart refused to accept, insisting there had to be another twist, another lie, because Jack Abbott had always been a survivor, a man who danced on the edge of disaster and somehow escaped, yet Victor's grim certainty left no room for doubt, and when he revealed that Matt had also implicated others, names still sealed, alliances still hidden, the room fell into stunned silence, because it became clear this conspiracy had roots spreading far deeper than anyone had imagined. At Jabot, Kyle faced a boardroom filled with whispers and judgment, his voice steady despite the devastation clawing at his chest as he fought to protect the company from immediate collapse, assuring investors that Jack's arrest did not define Jabot's future, even as privately he questioned whether he could ever forgive his father for endangering everything they stood for. And elsewhere, in a holding cell reeking of despair, Matt smirked to himself, convinced he had outplayed everyone, believing that by feeding Victor just enough truth he could bargain his way to freedom, unaware that Victor had anticipated this move too, quietly setting events in motion to ensure Matt's cooperation would only tighten the noose around his neck. As dawn crept over Genoa City, bringing no comfort with its pale light, Victor met with federal investigators, laying out the final pieces of the puzzle. How Matt's original plan had involved a staged corporate implosion, how Jack was meant to take the fall only if things went wrong, and how the ultimate target had always been Victor himself, not merely his company but his legacy, his family, his name, and the investigators listened intently as Victor delivered the last shock of all. Proof that Matt had orchestrated events leading to multiple crimes that had yet to be uncovered, crimes that would soon erupt into public view and shatter reputations across the city. By the time news broke that Jack Abbott had been formally charged, shockwaves rippled through every household, alliances shifted in real time, and old enemies found themselves united by shared uncertainty, while Jack, alone in his cell, finally allowed himself to break, tears falling as he whispered apologies to ghosts who could not hear him. Ashley, Kyle, even Victor, realizing too late that ambition had blinded him to the cost of betrayal, and as Victor stood before his family that evening, his expression hardened by resolve, he made a chilling promise that echoed through the room and beyond it, vowing that this was only the beginning, that every lie connected to Jack and Matt would be dragged into the light no matter how painful the fallout, because Genoa City could no longer survive on secrets alone, and with that vow hanging heavily in the air, the city braced itself for the next devastating chapter, knowing that nothing and no one would emerge unscathed. The following days unfolded like a slow-burning catastrophe that refused to be contained, because Jack Abbott's arrest was no longer just a scandal but a living, breathing wound ripping through Genoa City, and as headlines screamed his name and pundits dissected his fall with merciless fascination, the real damage was happening behind closed doors where loyalties cracked and truths long buried clawed their way to the surface, beginning in the sterile visiting room of the jail where Ashley Abbott finally faced her brother, her eyes hard with betrayal as Jack tried to speak and failed, because there were no words left that could undo the devastation Victor had exposed, no explanation that could justify aligning with Matt, a man whose trail of manipulation and violence now stretched further back than anyone had imagined, and when Ashley demanded to know how far Jack had gone, how many lines he had crossed, his silence answered her more brutally than any confession, leaving her to walk away with tears streaming down her face as the last fragile thread of sibling trust snapped. Meanwhile, Victor Newman moved through the city like an executioner cloaked in inevitability, summoned to closed-door meetings with federal prosecutors, corporate regulators, and shadowy figures who suddenly found their past dealings under scrutiny, and with each meeting Victor revealed another layer of the conspiracy, exposing how Matt had quietly embedded himself into Genoa City's power structure. Years earlier, exploiting rivalries, inflaming old grudges, and promising influence to anyone willing to look the other way, including Jack, whose resentment toward Victor had been carefully nurtured until it eclipsed his moral compass entirely. At the Newman Ranch, Nikki wrestled with a haunting realization that Victor's victory came at an unbearable cost, because even justice left scars, and when she confronted him late one night, questioning whether vengeance had blinded him too, Victor admitted with rare vulnerability that he had once hoped Jack would stop, would confess, would choose redemption before it was too late, but that hope had died the moment Victor uncovered proof that Jack had knowingly helped Matt erase evidence tied to the hospital attack, a decision that could have allowed a killer to strike again. And in that moment Nikki understood that what Victor had done was not driven by hatred alone, but by an unyielding need to protect his family from a threat that wore the face of an old friend. Across town, Phyllis spiraled between fury and guilt, haunted by memories of standing beside Jack when the world doubted him, now questioning every conversation, every reassuring smile, wondering how much he had hidden even from her. And when she confronted Kyle at Jabot, their argument erupted into raw pain as Kyle accused her of enabling Jack's worst impulses, of always believing she could control chaos until chaos finally consumed them all, leaving Phyllis shaken by the realization that love, when twisted by loyalty, could become complicity. Behind bars, Matt's smug confidence began to erode as the walls closed in tighter than he had anticipated, because Victor had anticipated everything, including Matt's belief that cooperation would save him, and when prosecutors presented evidence tying Matt not only to Jack but to a broader criminal network involving blackmail, corporate sabotage, and at least one death disguised as an accident, Matt's composure cracked for the first time, his rage spilling over as he accused Victor of setting him up from the very beginning, unaware that his own arrogance had been his undoing. As the city watched the drama unfold, whispers spread of another name soon to be revealed, someone still free whose involvement threatened to destabilize everything. And when Victor finally confirmed those rumors in a tense press conference, revealing that a prominent Genoa City figure had secretly financed Matt's operations for years, shock turned to fear because it meant the danger was not over. It was merely evolving, and that night Jack lay awake in his cell, staring at the ceiling as the weight of his choices crushed him, realizing with sickening clarity that he had not been Matt's partner but his pawn, used to legitimize a plan that was never about power but about destruction. And for the first time Jack admitted to himself that Victor had seen the truth long before he ever had. The fallout rippled outward as alliances shifted and old enemies found themselves forced into uneasy cooperation, while families fractured under the strain of revelations they could no longer ignore. And as Victor stood alone once more in his study, reviewing the final file that would bring the last conspirator into the light, his expression was grim but resolute, because he knew that exposing the truth was only the first step, that forgiveness might never come, and that the cost of survival in Genoa City was often paid in blood, betrayal, and irreversible loss. And as thunder rolled over the city once again, it became terrifyingly clear that Jack Abbott's arrest was not the end of the story, but the spark that had ignited a reckoning no one would escape. The city held its breath as the fallout from Jack Abbott's arrest continued to spread like a slow, poisonous fog, because even behind steel bars his choices were still detonating lives. And in the quiet isolation of his cell Jack finally confronted the brutal truth that Victor Newman had not destroyed him out of vengeance but had simply exposed what Jack himself had allowed to rot. While across town Victor stood before his family with a resolve sharpened by exhaustion, warning them that Matt's secrets were only partially revealed and that another name, one far more dangerous, was still hidden in the shadows, a revelation that sent a chill through Nikki as she realized the threat to their family was not over, not even close. At Jabot, Kyle faced a board of directors demanding blood, his voice steady as he defended the company's future, while privately grappling with the unbearable weight of being his father's last line of defense. And as Phyllis watched him from the hallway, guilt gnawed at her because she knew how fiercely she had protected Jack even when doubt whispered he was capable of betrayal, and now that doubt screamed. Meanwhile, in federal custody, Matt's confidence finally shattered as prosecutors laid out the final evidence tying him to years of manipulation, corporate sabotage, and violence. His fury exploding when he realized Victor had orchestrated his downfall from the moment he stepped into Genoa City, and when Matt finally demanded to see Jack, hoping to share the blame or shift it entirely, he was denied, because Jack had already confessed to everything, choosing at last to stop protecting a lie that had cost too many lives. The shock of Jack's confession rippled outward, silencing critics and devastating his family, especially Ashley, who wept alone as she accepted that her brother's need to beat Victor had consumed the man she once trusted. And as the press descended on Genoa City once more, Victor made a chilling public statement vowing that every secret connected to Matt's network would be dragged into the light no matter how powerful the people involved, a declaration that sent panic through boardrooms and mansions alike. And as night fell, Jack stared through the narrow window of his cell, knowing redemption might never come but clinging to the fragile hope that telling the truth could spare others the destruction he had unleashed, while Victor, standing in the shadows of his study, understood that victory carried no peace, only the grim knowledge that in Genoa City, survival always came at a devastating cost, and the war he had begun was far from over.